Hey everyone, and welcome back. For me, the idea of media being a force for good is something I'm always so pumped about, and well, today we are really diving into that.
Yeah,
We're talking about community radio and how it's making a real difference in tackling the UN's Sustainable Development Goals.
totally. And it's such a timely topic too, right? With that 2030 deadline for the SDGs coming up fast,
Yeah,
the work these stations are doing is more important now than ever.
for sure. And we've got two really interesting sources for this deep dive.
Yeah.
First up, we've got this handbook, and it's full of these real-life stories. It's called Best Practices of Community Radio and Sustainable Development Goals. It looks at how community stations in Bangladesh, India, and Nepal are, actually making the SDGs happen.
Yeah.
Seriously, this thing is packed with inspiring stories. It's unbelievable. And then our second source, it's not specifically about community radio, but it adds this crucial context.
It does.
It's an academic paper, actually, looking at media strategies for promoting the SDGs, and it uses this case study from Lebanon.
Right.
So, although the focus is geographically different, it still brings up some really thought-provoking questions about how we can use media effectively to make positive changes, which, of course, applies everywhere.
Totally.
Yeah. Okay, so we're going deep today, folks, not just like skimming the surface. We're really going to explore what these radio stations are doing, but also why their work matters on a global scale.
Right.
How can something that's so hyper-local, so community-focused, contribute to these huge, massive global goals? Well, that's what we're here to figure out.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that makes this topic so fascinating is just the sheer scale and vibrancy of community radio in Bangladesh, India, and Nepal.
Yeah.
Our handbook focuses on stations across these three countries. We're talking hundreds of them, each one this lifeline for a specific local community.
Hundreds. Seriously. That's amazing.
It's incredible, isn't it?
Yeah.
And while they all, share that same dedication to local content and giving their communities a voice, the way they actually operate can be pretty different because of things like licensing and regulations, which vary.
Yeah.
India, for instance, really stands out. It's got a really robust community radio sector, boasting over 300 stations.
Wow, that is a serious grassroots movement with reach. One thing that really stood out to me in this handbook, though, was the part on the challenges these stations faced during COVID, during the pandemic.
Yeah.
Think about it, right? Lockdowns, isolation, having to totally reinvent how they work, all at the same time as this huge surge in demand for reliable information about COVID-19.
Totally.
They were literally on the front lines of this, what do they call it, this infodemic.
They were, and it just goes to show how adaptable and resilient community radio is.
Yeah.
And this whole idea of media playing this vital role, especially during those times of crisis, it's a point that's really hammered home in our second source, that academic paper on media strategies.
Oh, totally. And that paper also mentions information overload, which honestly makes me wonder, how did these stations already stretched thin find any kind of balance between their regular programming and this really urgent need to address this global pandemic? It must have been such a tightrope walk.
It's really interesting, right? Because they didn't just ditch all their normal programming and go all COVID all the time.
Right.
Instead, what they did was really kind of cleverly weave all this pandemic-related information into the stuff they were already doing.
Right.
Addressing, all those really, really local anxieties and concerns that people had, but at the same time, continuing to provide, all those vital services that they already did, like education, entertainment, all that kind of stuff.
So they really became like this essential service for people during a time when everyone was feeling so isolated, right? Kind of reminds you of the really early days of radio.
Absolutely brings it back to its roots, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And that's where I think these stories in the handbook are so powerful.
Yeah.
These stations really went above and beyond to support their listeners during that time.
Give me an example. What kind of stuff did they do?
We'll take Radio Diamond, for example. They're in Manipur, India. And they were already doing a lot of programming on things like clean water and sanitation,
Right, which is so key for public health.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But during this one drought, their broadcasts actually inspired something really amazing.
What was that?
A whole village was inspired to set up a piped water supply system.
Wow. So literally from the radio waves to running water.
I know, it's amazing, isn't it?
And it wasn't just Radio Diamond telling them what to do, right? It was about empowering the community to take action, which, that's a huge theme that comes up in that media strategies paper we have as well, that second source.
It is. It's that whole thing about participatory development, isn't it?
Yes.
Which is just so powerful. And, speaking of empowerment, Radio Allah in Tamil Nadu had this great program called Dial Your Leader.
Okay.
And basically what it was listeners could call in and, get this, directly question local officials about, whatever issues were affecting their lives,
Wow.
including access to public services.
Hold on. So they're holding these people in power accountable, like on the air.
On air, live.
That's amazing.
I know. It's just such a great example of what community radio does best, right?
Yeah.
Giving a voice to people who might not otherwise have one.
Right. Exactly.
Like that second source of ours, it really talks about how important media is in promoting transparency and good governance,
For sure.
This is a perfect example of that in action.
Totally, totally. And this whole thing, this theme of empowerment, of giving people the tools that they need to actually make a change themselves, it just runs through this entire handbook.
It does.
Yeah, health, education, gender equality, you name it. Community radio is giving these marginalized communities a platform, and it's helping drive real progress.
It is. It's amazing.
Okay, I want to hear some more of these amazing stories. Like, this handbook is like a gold mine of examples of community radio's impact on the SDGs.
Oh, yeah, it totally is.
Let's start with health and well-being, SDG 3.
Yeah, man.
What do you have for me?
Well, we've talked about Radio Diamond and Clean Water,
Yes.
but there's also Radio Matoli in Kerala,
Okay.
and they've actually won awards for their health programming.
Really?
Yeah. What's really remarkable about them is they take this really holistic approach. They partner with all kinds of the different healthcare providers. They tackle really sensitive issues, like even things like menstrual hygiene.
What?
And they've even found ways to bring those health messages into other areas of their programming, like they've even worked them into their agricultural programs.
Wow. Talk about really meeting people where they're at,
I know.
It's not just like this one-off campaign, it's like ingrained in everything they do.
Totally, yeah.
Which it really makes you realize how important those partnerships are. Something that, again, that second source, the academic paper, really emphasized.
Absolutely. Collaboration is key.
Yeah.
And actually, speaking of healthcare, we were talking about Radio Allah earlier, their Dial Your Leader show.
Yes.
Well, it had this kind of surprising impact in healthcare too.
Really?
By connecting citizens directly with the collector. They helped resolve a ton of issues related to public services, including healthcare.
That's amazing how something so simple, like just a phone-in show,
Right.
can create this whole new level of accountability in the local healthcare system.
It's all about, giving people those tools to advocate for themselves, right?
Exactly.
It's about fostering dialogue and action. And, speaking of empowerment, access to quality education is another area where community radio is making a really big difference.
For sure, SDG 4, that one's close to my heart.
It is.
What are some of the ways these stations are actually supporting education in their communities?
Well, remember Radio Matoli, our award-winning health champions?
Yes.
Well, they're also doing incredible work reaching tribal communities in Kerala.
Oh, wow.
And they've come up with these really innovative ways to overcome language barriers, tackle things like poverty and drug abuse, which obviously could be huge barriers to education.
Yeah, absolutely. Heartbreaking, but so true for a lot of these communities. Making sure that those who are the most marginalized have that access to education is so, so important.
Yeah.
What other examples are there?
Well, there's Radio Miwat in Haryana, and they had this program called Radio Tuitions, and they were basically giving free education over the airwaves.
What?
I know. So students could literally just tune into the radio and get the support that they needed to understand their school lessons.
I wish I had that. That is amazing. And it just shows how community radio can really step up and fill in those gaps where the kind of traditional education system might be failing,
Exactly.
It's about accessibility and innovation.
Totally. And then there's Radio Namaskar in Odisha.
Okay.
They launched this really, really powerful campaign to fight back against school dropouts.
Wow.
Think about that. They were mobilizing this entire community, getting parents, teachers, everybody involved.
That's amazing.
Even working directly with the education department.
Wow.
They weren't just talking about this problem. They were being a force for change.
Okay, but did it work?
It did. They actually, because of their campaign, over 155 schools were declared zero dropout zones.
That is remarkable. Imagine the ripple effect on those students, their families, like the whole community,
It's amazing, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah. And it's interesting. I'm sensing a theme here.
What's that?
These stations aren't just like reporting on these issues. They're really rolling up their sleeves and tackling them head on,
Oh, they are. Which brings us to SDG 5, gender equality.
Oh, huge. And there are so many fantastic examples here.
Yeah.
Radio Alpha Zimiwat in Haryana is doing amazing work addressing all these women's issues, everything from early marriage to domestic violence. They're creating this really safe space for women to talk about their experiences, learn about their rights. It's incredible.
It's so important, right, to give women a voice, empower them to actually take control of their lives, especially in these communities where these traditional gender roles can be so limiting.
Exactly. And then you've got Radio Vishwas in Uttar Pradesh,
Okay.
and they're really focusing on financial inclusion for women.
Okay.
They've helped women to open bank accounts, access government schemes, even, think about this, avoid financial scams.
Wow, that's incredible. Talk about empowering women economically. That's amazing. And you know what it reminds me of? That part in the media strategies paper where they talk about using media to promote financial literacy.
It's so important, isn't it?
It is.
And then, Radio Mahananda in Bangladesh is another good example. It really showcases how much women's empowerment and economic growth are really intertwined.
Yes.
The programming's had such tangible impacts on women's lives. Like, take Maharomi Begum, for instance. She was actually able to expand her goat rearing business thanks to all the information and support that she got from the radio station.
It's amazing giving women those tools and the knowledge that they need to create these better futures for themselves and for their families as well.
Totally, it's amazing.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground, but I'm curious about SDG 8, decent work and economic growth.
Okay.
Like, I imagine community radio plays a role there, too.
Oh, huge, definitely, yeah.
What's an example?
Take Radio Sindhu in Nepal, for example. They've been running these vocational training programs for farmers, teaching them all these sustainable agriculture techniques and things.
Nice.
One farmer, Srinath Kiwat, actually, he adopted all of these biodynamic agriculture practices, and he's seen a huge improvement in his livelihood since.
Again, it's not just giving people a voice, but it's giving them the skills and the knowledge they need to actually create these better lives for themselves.
It is, totally.
Yeah.
And Gurgaon Ki Awaz in Haryana, they've got this fantastic career counseling series where they actually connect their listeners with experts.
Oh, wow.
From organizations like, the Provident Fund Office and ESIC, providing all this really practical information and guidance, helping people to navigate that job market, which can be a really confusing landscape.
It's amazing. It's like these stations are so plugged in to what's going on.
Totally.
Providing exactly the kind of information and support that people really need.
Absolutely. I think that's the essence of community radio, isn't it?
Yeah.
So deeply rooted in their communities. They really understand the challenges, and they're finding such inventive ways to address them.
It's incredible. It's so clear these small stations are making a huge impact.
They are, yeah.
Were there any other examples from this handbook that stood out to you?
There's one about Radioactive in Bangalore
Okay.
that I found really, really inspiring.
Okay, now you're talking my language. Tell me more.
They have this incredible waste management initiative going on.
Amazing.
And what I love about it is how it's given a voice to waste pickers.
Right.
Those individuals that are often so overlooked.
Totally. And they're the ones on the front lines of all this.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And, they play such a vital role in the whole waste management chain.
They do.
And often they're the ones most affected by unsustainable waste management practices, right?
For sure.
And Radioactive has been helping them to gain recognition for their work, get access to training, even get certified.
So they're not just talking about sustainability, they're empowering the people who are actually doing the work. I love that.
Isn't it great?
It's brilliant.
And this whole initiative has had this amazing ripple effect. It's raised awareness about waste management within the whole community.
Wow.
It's even influenced some local policies.
It's like they're turning waste pickers into these, agents of change.
I know.
So inspiring. Okay, one more SDG for you. Number 13, climate action.
Okay.
How are these radio stations helping in the fight against climate change?
Oh, there are some really powerful examples here too, like Radio Chanderi Ki Awaz in Madhya Pradesh.
Okay.
They've been huge champions for organic farming.
Awesome.
And they actually inspired one farmer, Mathura Prasad Patel, to switch to all these sustainable practices.
That's great.
And he's seen such a difference in his yields and just the overall health of his land as well.
It's all connected, isn't it?
It is.
They're showing how these individual actions can contribute to this much bigger global goal.
It is. It's about changing mindsets as much as it is about changing practices, isn't it?
For sure.
And in West Bengal, you've got Radio Boral.
Okay.
and they play this really critical role in disaster preparedness.
Wow.
They provide really essential information during, cyclones and floods, which, as we know, are becoming way more frequent and way more intense because of climate change, right?
It's about building resilience at the community level,
Right.
right? Which is so essential.
Totally. Yeah, giving these communities the tools they need to adapt and thrive no matter what challenges come their way.
Exactly.
It kind of makes me think of something that really stuck with me from that second source we discussed earlier, that academic paper.
Okay.
It's all about making sure that the messages that we're putting out there are trustworthy and that they're accurate,
Right.
It's crucial, right? Because at the end of the day, people need to be able to trust where their information is coming from, especially when we're talking about something as important as, building a sustainable future for everyone.
Totally. And that trust, I think it really starts with authenticity.
Absolutely.
Like, it's got to be genuine.
It does, yeah. And, going back to that second source we have, that academic paper on media strategies, it actually offers some really interesting parallels here.
Oh.
Even though it's focused on, this totally different context, it's about the Global Compact Network, Lebanon, or GCNL. There are these, really striking similarities to what we're seeing with all these community radio stories.
Okay. I'm interested. Tell me more. How do they connect?
Both the community radio stations and GCNL, they both show just how powerful partnerships can be.
Yeah.
Neither of them are working in isolation. They're collaborating with NGOs, with local government, with you name it. Even international organizations are getting involved to really ramp up their impact.
Wow, that's amazing.
It's like they're creating this web.
They are of support, bringing all these different people and groups together who all have that same goal in mind.
It's really cool. And you know what?
Right.
That second source, it brings up a really important question.
Okay. What's that?
How do we actually measure what these media campaigns are doing?
Right.
It's one thing to have all these inspiring anecdotes, which we've talked about a bunch today, but how do we know it's really making a difference? How do we know that it's actually working?
Right. That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
It's easy to get caught up on all these feel-good stories,
Totally.
but we need that hard evidence.
We do, and that's where these community radio examples are so great, because a lot of these stations are really, really proactive about going out and tracking their impact.
Oh.
They're not just assuming that they're making a difference, they want to prove it.
I love that.
So they're using things like listener feedback, they're doing community surveys, they're even tracking how local policies are changing to see, okay, is what we're doing actually translating into real world change?
So they're putting in the work.
They are.
Yeah, they're holding themselves accountable, which I think probably makes people trust them even more.
Totally, yeah. And that focus on accountability, it's so essential, especially when we're dealing with sustainable development and these massive issues.
Right.
And it actually links back to what we were saying about that GCNL example.
Okay.
Their success is also built on this foundation of trust and credibility.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Just like with these radio stations we've been talking about.
Totally. It makes you realize how important it is for people to feel like they can actually trust where their information's coming from.
Oh, it's crucial.
Yeah.
Especially with something as important as this, as, building a sustainable future.
Right. Exactly. And, I think for me, what's been so eye-opening about this whole deep dive is just seeing the ripple effect that these radio stations are creating.
It's amazing.
It's incredible, and it makes you think, how many other community radio heroes are out there just quietly doing amazing work that, most of us never even hear about. What can we be doing to support them, to learn from them, maybe even to work with them and be a part of the solution?
That's a great question.
It's something to think about, right?
It is, yeah. All these incredible stories, they really highlight something that I think is easy to overlook, and that's the power of these hyper-local media outlets, you know? And in a world that's dealing with these huge, massive global challenges like we've been talking about today, the SDGs.
Right.
Maybe the key really is to empower the people who are closest to the problems, those who truly understand their communities, to actually be the ones to create the solutions.
That's a great point to end on, I think.
Yeah.
Well, this has been an amazing deep dive. I've learned so much.
You too.
Thanks to everyone for joining us today. And hey, maybe go out there and tune into your local community radio station.
Yeah.
You might be surprised what you find.